deep in the far northwest of Canada, in the territory known as the Northwest Territories. Within the northern expanse of North America lies one of the most remote and geologically dramatic protected landscapes on the planet, Nahanni National Park Reserve. But long before it was ever labeled a park reserve, long before conservation boundaries and government protection, this land already had a history, one written by ice, water, indigenous knowledge systems, and eventually by outsiders who arrived searching for fortune and left with more questions than answers. The history of Nahanni begins not with humans, but with deep time. Millions of years ago, this region was shaped by ancient seas, tectonic shifts, and the slow uplift of rock layers that would eventually form the Mackenzie Mountains. Limestone deposits accumulated when much of the area was underwater, and as the land rose, those sedimentary layers became exposed. Over time, water became the primary force of transformation. Rivers began carving through the soft limestone, exploiting fractures, deepening valleys, and creating the canyon system that now defines Nahanni. The South Nahanni River became the central architect of the landscape. It did not rush its work. It eroded patiently, relentlessly, cutting deeper into the earth with every seasonal cycle. This process created dramatic gorges, steep cliffs, and vertical canyon walls that today plunge hundreds of meters downward, forming one of the most visually extreme river systems in North America. Long before European contact, indigenous peoples, particularly the Dene, lived in and around this region. For them, the land was not empty wilderness, but a lived environment with spiritual, survival, and cultural significance. The river systems provided routes for travel, hunting grounds, and seasonal migration pathways. Oral histories describe the land with respect and caution, recognizing both its abundance and its unpredictability. Certain areas of the valley were approached with cultural awareness of danger, not because of superstition, but because of lived environmental knowledge passed through generations. The name Nahanni itself is derived from the Dene word Naha, often interpreted as river of the land or spirit river, reflecting the deep connection between geography and identity in indigenous understanding of the region. The outside world, however, did not arrive until much later. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as Canada expanded its northern exploration and resource mapping efforts, prospectors and explorers began pushing into increasingly remote territories. The Mackenzie River Basin and its surrounding mountain systems became areas of interest due to rumors of mineral wealth, particularly gold. By the early 1900s, stories began circulating about the Nahanni Valley. Prospectors entered the region in search of gold deposits, drawn by reports of rich mineral veins and unexplored terrain. Some did find traces of gold in river sediments and rock formations, but extraction was difficult due to the terrain's isolation and harsh conditions. More significantly, a series of strange and unsettling accounts began emerging from those expeditions. Several prospectors reportedly disappeared without explanation. Others were later found dead under unclear circumstances. Camps were discovered abandoned, with supplies left behind, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Over time, these incidents accumulated into regional folklore. This is where the darker mythology of Nahanni began to form, particularly the legend of the so-called Valley of Headless Men. The name emerged from repeated, though often unverified, accounts of bodies found without heads in the valley during early exploration periods. Whether these reports were exaggerated, misinterpreted, or rooted in isolated incidents remains debated by historians and geographers. Many modern analyses attribute the dangers of the region to very real environmental risks, extreme isolation, wildlife encounters, accidents in steep canyon terrain, exposure, and the difficulty of rescue operations in inaccessible areas. Still, the stories persisted because the environment itself reinforced a sense of unpredictability. In a place where communication was non-existent, weather could shift rapidly, and navigation was difficult, disappearance did not require mystery to occur, only miscalculation. By the mid-20th century, Canadian authorities began taking greater interest in the region, both for its ecological uniqueness and its growing reputation. Scientific expeditions were launched to better understand the geology, river systems, and ecological composition of the valley. These studies confirmed what early explorers had only partially understood. Nahanni was not just remote, it was structurally exceptional. The canyon system carved by the South Nahanni River was far deeper and more complex than initially mapped. Features such as Virginia Falls were documented in greater detail, revealing a waterfall nearly twice the height of Niagara Falls, plunging into a narrow canyon that amplified both sound and force in dramatic ways. Geological surveys also identified extensive karst systems, underground drainage networks, and cave formations that suggested long-term water interaction with soluble rock layers. As scientific understanding grew, so did awareness of the need for protection. The region was increasingly recognized not as a resource frontier to be exploited, but as a rare, intact example of large-scale northern wilderness. Its ecological systems remained largely undisturbed, its wildlife populations relatively intact, and its geological formations scientifically significant. In response, Canada began formal conservation efforts. In 1972, the area was designated as a National Park Reserve, marking the beginning of structured protection for the region. The designation allowed for both preservation and the continuation of Indigenous land use rights, while limiting large-scale industrial development and uncontrolled access. Over time, the protected area expanded. Today, Nahanni National Park Reserve covers a vast section of the Mackenzie Mountains region in the Northwest Territories of Canada, within the broader geographic system of North America. It is now recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, highlighting its global significance in terms of geology and natural heritage. Modern understanding of Nahanni is now shaped by three overlapping perspectives. First, the geological perspective sees it as a dynamic landscape, still being actively shaped by erosion, waterflow, and tectonic history. The land is not static. It is evolving on a timescale that far exceeds human observation. Second, the ecological perspective recognizes it as a relatively intact northern ecosystem, where wildlife populations still operate with minimal human interference. Bears, wolves, caribou, and mountain goats move through the terrain in seasonal patterns that have existed long before modern mapping. Third, the cultural and historical perspective acknowledges both Indigenous knowledge systems and the legacy of exploration narratives that shaped how the outside world came to perceive the valley, as a place of both natural wonder and cautionary mystery. Today, access to the park remains highly controlled. There are no roads leading into its core. Entry is typically by float plane, and expeditions are carefully regulated to minimize ecological impact. This limited access has helped preserve its condition, allowing it to remain one of the least disturbed major wilderness regions on the continent. What makes Nahanni historically significant is not just its past events, but the continuity of its condition. Unlike many landscapes that have been heavily modified by agriculture, urbanization, or industry, Nahanni retains a geological and ecological continuity that stretches back millions of years with relatively minimal disruption. In that sense, its history is not only human history, it is Earth history, still actively unfolding in real time, and that is what makes it unique. Because in a world where most places have been reshaped, renamed, and restructured, Nahanni National Park Reserve remains one of the few environments in North America, Canada's Northwest Territories, where the dominant author of history is still nature itself, not civilization.